Hi homesteaders, my name is Melissa with Gullion Homestead and welcome to my channel where we focus on homesteading skills, self-sufficiency, and resilience. And if you could share this video, like, and subscribe, that would really help our channel grow. Today we are working on sourdough bread, kind of my own take on sourdough and the trials that I've kind of worked through to actually get a really good Einkorn sourdough bread recipe. So here what I'm doing is I feed my sourdough starter really just 3 days a week. And if you go over to gullionhomestead.com, I have a blog post on there that actually shares exactly how I do that. I feed it 5 times in a week, 2 times a day, the first 2 days, and then just 1 time the last day that I'm making bread. So what you see right here is I've taken my bubbly starter the evening before I want to make bread. And I take my bubbly starter and I pour into a little bowl right there, 50 grams of active sourdough starter. This is what I do every time I start bread. I take the bubbly starter the night before. It's been fed in the morning, so it's nice and bubbly 8 to 12 hours later. And I put 50 grams in my bowl, and then I add 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. Mix it all up. And then I'm going to cover it up and just let it sit there for overnight until morning and let it get nice and bubbly. Now, I know that there are other recipes out there that actually call for just like 30 grams of starter to start their bread, sometimes even less than that. But I find that I need a good, like, strong starter to get my bread going. And it's okay. That's just the recipe I use. I started to think about, why is my bread not rising really well? Besides the fact that I was using einkorn flour, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But really, I was more like focused in on why I'm not getting a good rise. And I started to think about how my sourdough starter is really strong, but I felt like I didn't have like enough strength in my sourdough to actually get a good rise. And I do believe that has to do with the flour, but so for now, this is what I'm doing for now, and it's working really well for me. So here, what I'm doing is I'm feeding my sourdough for the last time this week. And again, you can find that over at gullionhomestead.com under my recipe for bread. It actually has directions on how I feed my sourdough starter. I'll briefly tell you about that, but basically, I feed my sourdough starter day 1, which is normally Thursday morning, and I feed it Thursday morning, and then I feed it again Thursday evening. So I do 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour to feed my sourdough. The big glass jar you see there is my discard. So I discard pretty much everything that is in my sourdough starter. I discard almost all of it. Just a scant amount do I leave in there. I mix in the water and the flour in the morning on Thursday, do that again Thursday evening. Then on Friday morning, I actually do that Friday morning again, Friday evening again. And then on Saturday morning, Friday evening, I actually start my bread. So this is what I'm doing here. I started my bread on Friday evening, and then Saturday morning, I get up and do the whole process that you're seeing right here. So then I actually put my bread or my sourdough discard in the fridge, and I let my sourdough sit on the counter for about 12 hours and then throw that in the fridge for the following week. So that is how I feed my sourdough starter. So here I got up in the morning and I decided that I was going to go ahead and get going early on my bread Saturday morning, and I got my scale out. My sourdough starter is sitting right there in my little container with the wood lid. That is actually going to pop into the fridge, and that's going to be good for another week. I'm not going to feed it anymore. I choose not to do this because I have enough discard already. It's just two of us in our household. It's just Steve and I, and we really don't eat more than one loaf of bread a week. Sometimes we don't even go through a whole loaf. So it's important not to waste our food. We really feel passionate about eating everything that is in our home and not wasting any food. So here, what I'm getting ready to do is I've got my mixing bowl. I stick it on my scale, zero it out, and then I'm going to throw my sourdough starter, which at this point will be 150 grams, because I got 50 grams from my starter last night. I added 50 grams of water, 50 grams of flour, and that is all going to go into my mixing bowl right there. And that is a good, bubbly, strong starter, strong yeast for my bread that's going to help my bread get nice and fluffy and rise really nice. So here, what I did is I add 270 grams of water and mix that up real good. We're going to add 10 grams of salt, and then I'm going to add a total of 500 grams of flour. So let's talk about the flour. You can use an all-purpose bread flour if you would like. I, of course, decided when I started making bread I started making bread about 8 months ago. I started my own sourdough from scratch, my own sourdough starter from scratch. I will do a video on that at some point, just not really prepared to do that just yet. But I started right with Einkorn flour because I love the fact that it is a ancient grain. It's easier to digest. It's really high in protein. There were all these good things about it. But I really struggled because Einkorn flour is one of the most difficult flours to make a bread out of, especially when you're starting to make bread. So my Einkorn flour actually has a really low gluten structure. So that was kind of a struggle when I was learning to make bread. So here what I do is, as I'm gathering everything together, I'm getting ready to get my bulk flours out. I have an all-purpose bread and pizza flour, and I have an all-purpose Einkorn flour. So you need 500 milligrams of flour to get this bread to the consistency that you need for bread. Now, if you choose to use all-purpose flour, that's fine. If you want to use all Einkorn flour, that would probably work too. But what I do is I do 300 grams of all-purpose bread flour, and then I add 200 grams of all-purpose Einkorn flour. This is a great starter recipe for people who are trying to learn to cook with Einkorn, because the bread flour, the all-purpose bread flour, has got a good gluten structure anyway. And so you get a good blend of both flours. You actually do really taste the Einkorn in the flour as well. And then it's just a little easier to get that rise that you're looking for. All right, so I mixed up my dough with the dough hook in the KitchenAid, and then let it sit on the counter for an hour and let it rest. And it's important that you cover that dough up with some plastic wrap. And I usually throw a lid on top of my mixing bowl just to kind of make sure that it's nice and protected. And so what I'm going to start now are my stretch and folds. Now, if you have watched bread videos before, you probably have seen how people do a stretch and fold on the countertop or a stretch and fold in their bowl. And I do my stretch and folds a little different because this is what I have found works for me. I've never seen anybody else do a stretch and fold like that. Maybe there's somebody that does it out there. I don't know, but I think this is kind of Melissa's original way. We'll see. Maybe somebody will have something in the comment section of somebody they've seen do this. But I basically stretch and pull and then fold over my dough on top of each other in my hands. And I do this about 6 times. And I do this until it's so tight that I can't pull and fold anymore. And what this does is this is just another way of building up your gluten structure in your bread. I have found that when I do just a typical stretch and fold every 15 to 30 minutes on the countertop with just 4 folds, I don't really get a good rise in my bread. So this is something that I have come up with in my kitchen, and it works well for me. And normally it's about 6 stretch and folds that I do in my hand. So then I let my bread sit, or my dough sit, for 30 minutes, and then I do a second set of stretch and folds. So here, when I pull my dough out, you'll notice that the dough has kind of a little bit lost its structure. It's much easier to stretch and pull once I have it look at that, once I let it sit for 30 minutes, and I'm just stretching and folding, stretching and folding. I do this it takes me about 6 times to get to where I can't do it anymore. And it's definitely a good upper arm workout for sure. So I'm going to cover that up again, let it sit for 30 minutes. Now let's talk about keeping it covered. It's important. I've tried this with just a tea towel. It doesn't work as well. I like to use plastic wrap because it prevents any kind of hard coating or air to get to my dough, and that's important when you're working with your dough. Okay, so now I'm on my last set of stretch and folds. Just a reminder, you do 4 stretch and folds 30 minutes apart. So this is number 4, and I am stretching and pulling and folding here, and you can see it gets really tough when I get to like number 5. Not as easy as it was at the beginning, which means I've really built up a good gluten structure in my bread. I can barely even do number 6. Throw it back into my mixing bowl, and then I'm going to put my mixing bowl into my oven on the proofing setting. I have a proofing oven. My kitchen is pretty cool, so if you have a kitchen that is warm or is warmer, we keep our house like in the 60s, so like 67, 68. So my kitchen in general is pretty cool. So I just put it in my proofing oven for 5 to 6 hours until it rises 30 to 50%. It doesn't always rise to 50%, but at least 30%. And if you have a warm oven, or if you don't, or a warm kitchen, you can just put it in your kitchen. If you don't have a warm kitchen, you can stick this on top of your refrigerator, on top of your dryer. That heat from either one of those appliances will actually help with this. Okay, so I've taken my dough out of the proofing oven, and I'm just throwing some all-purpose flour down on the countertop just so that my dough doesn't stick too much. And you are going to see here that this dough, when it comes out of my mixing bowl, has a nice, very, very nice rise. I would say a good 50% rise. It only took 4.5 hours to get this done today. For some reason, it didn't take near as long. I normally plan on 5 to 6 hours for a rise like this, but it did great. So really had some good rise out of that. So now what we're going to do is I just pretty much pull it out to like a rectangle, and then I just start pulling the sides in, as you can see, just to build a little bit of tension and to form it into a dough ball. Once I get that tucked right, nice and good, I flip it over on its side, and then you are just going to start to spin your dough in your hands against your countertop while tucking it underneath. And you're just going to continue to do this until you feel like you can't do it anymore. Seriously, you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And what this is doing is building tension. Now you could see when I just flipped that over that the bottom was not smooth. It was still kind of pulling apart. What we're looking for is a nice, smooth, flat bottom, because everything is tucked in tight once you do that. So just continue to, as you're turning it, you're going to notice that it's turning pretty easy. And once it starts to stick to the countertop a little bit more is when you're kind of know that you're starting to get a flat surface underneath. So continue to, you can still see it's still kind of open when I flipped it over. I normally flip it over a few times, just checking it to make sure that I don't already have a flat space and it's not done. So sometimes I pull some of the flour away just so it's not getting too dry underneath, because remember, we are going to let it sit for another rise, a second rise. So too much flour will actually prevent it from expanding. So I don't like to have too much flour on my dough, and we're going to just continue to spin it around. And I do a little tucking, as you can see, as I'm spinning it, just to kind of keep the tension building in my loaf. And yes, I know the loaf looks small now, but you're going to notice that it's going to When it rises again, it's going to rise nice and really nice and beautifully, another 30% or so. So there I go, tucking underneath, just working on the tension of the dough. I know it seems a little fussy and a little redundant, and you are going to get tired of doing this, but it really does not take very long to get a nice shaped dough. And once you get a nice tension and it starts sticking to the countertop, you can feel it. Just continue to move it around and it is going to get a flat spot, which you will see here in just a moment. And just like that, I've got a nice flat bottom, and I just turned it a few more times. Okay, here I gathered my bread basket. I have a liner in my bread basket. For me, this just works better. You can actually use just the wood basket as well, but you can see how flat that is on both sides. It's perfect for a second rise. I threw that in my floured basket. You can use it with the liner, without the liner, but sometimes if you get a really good rise, I have found that it will rise so much that it will stick inside my basket. So I just choose to use the liner. It just works better for me. So I threw a little flour in there, stuck my dough ball in there that is nice and round and just really smooth. Put a lid on it. Sometimes I'll stick that saran wrap back on it, but the last time I did that, I had such a good rise, it kind of stuck to my saran wrap. So I've chosen not to do that in the future. I just stuck a lid from a pot that I have on top of that basket, and you're gonna let this rise for 1 more hour before we start the next process. Okay, my dough has rested or is on its second rise now. It's been sitting here for 1 hour, and now I'm grabbing my Dutch oven, my large Dutch oven, and with the lid, and I'm going to place this in the oven at 425 degrees. Now this step is important. Make sure you put your Dutch oven in your oven, then turn on your oven at 425. And once your oven is heated up at 425, then you can add your bread dough to your Dutch oven at that point. All right, I checked my dough and it is bouncing back quite nicely. I know it is proofed, it's perfect. It's done its second rise, and it did rise about 30% larger than the original loaf. And now we are going to prepare it for the very, very hot Dutch oven. I'm just going to take a piece of parchment paper, and I am going to lightly just flip my bread loaf over into a piece of parchment paper. And then we are going to get the very hot Dutch oven out and set it on the countertop. Sometimes I do this just on the lid of the oven, but for video purposes, I did it on the countertop this time. And you can see there's steam coming out of there. It is a very, very hot Dutch oven. So you're going to place your dough inside the Dutch oven in the parchment paper, and then we're just going to do an easy cut with a very sharp knife in a crisscross fashion. You can do any kind of fancy thing you want. I just find this is just easy, and I'm going to eat it anyway, so if it's not beautiful, I'm okay with it. And then put the lid back on, and then you are going to bake this sweet piece of dough up at 45 minutes at a 425 degree oven. And after 45 minutes, I pop my Dutch oven out of the oven, and you will see a fantastic looking Einkorn sourdough bread that we made together today. Thank you for joining me with Gullion Homestead. I hope this is educational and you enjoyed this video. If you could please like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and share this video. This will help our channel grow. Thanks, and we hope you're having the best day.